Barron Trump arrives at Clint Eastwood's home with an unexpected gift, an SUV designed just for him. But what starts as a simple gesture unfolds into a deeply emotional moment that leaves the Hollywood legend speechless. As secrets are revealed and emotions run high, this unforgettable encounter will leave you in awe. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The morning sun stretched lazily over the California hills, casting a golden glow through the windows of Clint Eastwood's home. The house was silent, save for the soft hum of a nearby clock, ticking away the seconds. At 94 years old, Clint had seen it all: fame, success, hardship, and the changing tides of Hollywood. His weathered hands held a steaming cup of coffee, his eyes scanning the countless awards and framed movie posters adorning his study. A lifetime of achievements, yet something felt incomplete. The world still knew his name, but in the quiet moments like these he wondered, had he truly made a difference? Just as he leaned back into his chair, the sharp chime of the doorbell broke the silence. Clint furrowed his brows. Visitors were rare these days. With a slow but steady step, he made his way to the front door and opened it to find a sharply dressed courier standing before him. The young man extended an envelope sealed with gold wax and gave a polite nod. "Special delivery for Mr. Eastwood." Clint took the envelope, the weight of it unexpectedly heavy in his hand. There was an elegance to it, something personal, something significant. The courier didn't linger. He turned and walked away without another word. Clint closed the door behind him, his fingers tracing the edge of the envelope as he walked back to his study. Sitting down, he carefully peeled away the wax seal and pulled out a handwritten letter. The penmanship was refined, precise, deliberate. His eyes scanned the words, and with each line his expression shifted from curiosity to shock, then to something deeper. A rare, unshakable emotion that stirred inside him. "Dear Mr. Eastwood, you don't know me personally, but your movies have shaped my childhood. I've watched your characters stand tall in the face of adversity, uphold honor when it was easier to walk away, and teach lessons of resilience without ever saying too much. Growing up in the public eye, I've clung to those lessons more times than I can count. I'd love to meet you, not as a politician's son, but as a young man who deeply respects the impact you've had on generations, including mine. Please allow me to thank you in person for the strength and wisdom you've unknowingly given me. Warm regards, Barron Trump." Clint read the signature again, his breath hitching slightly. Barron Trump, the son of former President Donald Trump, a name known across the world. But this wasn't a political gesture. It felt personal, genuine, a rare kind of sincerity that was almost unheard of in Hollywood. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the letter for a long moment. For decades he had met countless fans, actors, and admirers, but something about this was different. He thought about the young man behind the name, a figure who had grown up under the scrutiny of the public eye, someone who, despite immense privilege, had been shaped by his films in ways Clint never expected. Slowly, Clint reached for the phone number included at the bottom of the letter. His fingers hovered over the keypad, hesitation flickering in his mind. Did he still have the energy for this? Did he want to open another door when he had spent so much time closing them? Then, with a deep breath, he pressed the call button. A smooth, professional voice answered on the first ring. "Mr. Eastwood, thank you for calling. Barron will be honored to meet you." For the first time in a long while, Clint felt something stir inside him. Not nostalgia, not regret, but the quiet thrill of anticipation. The morning of Barron Trump's visit was crisp, the California breeze carrying the scent of the ocean through Clint Eastwood's ranch-style home in Carmel by the sea. The legendary filmmaker stood on his porch, hands resting on the worn wooden railing, his sharp eyes scanning the winding road that led up to his property. He wasn't nervous. Clint Eastwood didn't get nervous, but he couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different. From a distance, he spotted a convoy of sleek black SUVs making their way up the road, their presence unmistakable. The Secret Service had to be involved, of course. Barron wasn't just any young man, but the son of a former U.S. president. Yet Clint had insisted that today remain private. No press, no political angles, just two men, decades apart in age, but connected by something deeper. As the SUVs pulled to a stop, the first agent stepped out, scanning the area with practiced efficiency. Clint watched with mild amusement. After all, he had spent a lifetime portraying the very men who carried out these security protocols in real life. But then, the door to the second SUV opened, and out stepped Barron Trump. At 18 years old, Barron was already a towering figure, standing well over 6 feet tall, dressed in a tailored navy moon suit that emphasized his composed, sophisticated presence. But what struck Clint the most wasn't the impeccable attire or the formal greeting. It was the look in the young man's eyes. There was no entitlement there, no arrogance. Instead, there was genuine admiration, a quiet respect that spoke louder than any introduction could. Barron approached with a warm, measured smile, extending his hand. "Mr. Eastwood, it's an honor." Clint chuckled, shaking his hand firmly. "Call me Clint. The honor's mine, kid. You're taller than I expected." Barron grinned, a flicker of amusement breaking through his composed demeanor. "I get that a lot." They walked toward Clint's home, stepping into the cozy, history-filled living room. It was a stark contrast to the sleek modernity of the world Barron was accustomed to. Walls lined with framed posters of Clint's greatest films, shelves stacked with awards, leather-bound scripts, and photographs spanning decades of Hollywood history. Barron took it all in with a quiet reverence, his fingers trailing over a faded script cover of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. "This is incredible," he murmured, turning to Clint. "You know, when I was a kid, I'd sneak into my father's media room just to watch your films. They taught me things no classroom ever could." Clint, usually unfazed by compliments, felt something unexpectedly stir inside him. He had heard people praise his work before, but never like this. This wasn't about fame or nostalgia. This was about legacy, about impact, about shaping a young man who had grown up under the harsh scrutiny of the world. They sat down across from each other, and for a moment silence filled the room. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence shared between men who didn't need to fill space with meaningless words. Then, Clint leaned forward, his voice low and thoughtful. "What made you reach out now?" Barron hesitated, his blue eyes darkening with something deeper, more personal. "Growing up in the public eye was tough," he admitted. "People see the name, the privilege, but they don't see the pressure. They don't see the expectations, the constant judgment. Your movies, they gave me courage. You didn't just play tough guys. You showed what it meant to stand for something, even when it wasn't easy." Clint listened intently. He had always prided himself on his no-nonsense, straight-shooting approach to life, but hearing Barron speak, he realized something. This kid wasn't looking for approval. He was looking for understanding. Barron reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. "This," he said, handing it to Clint, "is something I've kept for years. It's a list of lessons I learned from your films. I thought it might mean something to you." Clint took the notebook, his rough, calloused fingers running over its well-worn cover. He opened it and scanned the pages, handwritten notes in careful, deliberate script. "Unforgiven, 1992. Real strength isn't about revenge. It's about knowing when to walk away. Gran Torino, 2008. A man's worth isn't in what he has, but in what he gives to others. $1 Million Baby, 2004. No matter how tough life gets, it's never too late to fight for something you believe in." The words blurred slightly as a rare wave of emotion welled up in Clint's chest. This wasn't just admiration. This was something far more meaningful. He swallowed hard, gripping the notebook tightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with unspoken emotion. "You have no idea what this means to me." Barron smiled, his expression sincere. "I think I do." For a man who had spent a lifetime being the hero on screen, Clint realized that for the first time in a long while, Someone had made him feel like the hero in real life. And little did he know, Barron's biggest surprise was still yet to come. As the afternoon sun cast long golden rays over Clint Eastwood's ranch-style home, he and Barron Trump sat in the living room, their conversation flowing effortlessly. What had started as a simple meeting between two people from vastly different generations had evolved into something far more profound. Clint set down the small leather-bound notebook Barron had gifted him, his calloused fingers lingering over its pages. He had spent a lifetime portraying men of grit and principle, but seeing the impact his work had made on this young man, this son of a former president, raised under the scrutiny of the world's eye, felt like something far greater than any Academy Award or box office success. As the moment of quiet contemplation stretched between them, Barron straightened his posture slightly, as if bracing himself for something important. His sharp blue eyes, which carried an uncanny resemblance to his father's, locked onto Clint's with unwavering sincerity. "Clint," Barron began, his voice steady yet laced with something almost nervous, "there's something else." Clint leaned forward slightly, his brows furrowing. "Something else?" Barron nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips, as if he were holding onto a secret he could barely contain. "I wanted to do something for you," he continued. "Something that would show just how much your legacy means. To me, to so many people." Clint narrowed his gaze slightly, his legendary intuition kicking in. He had been in the business long enough to recognize when something big was about to happen. "Kid," he said gruffly, though not unkindly, "you don't owe me anything." Barron exhaled a quiet laugh. "Maybe not, but I want to." Before Clint could press him further, a commotion outside broke the quiet of the house. The unmistakable rumble of a large engine cut through the crisp California air. The sound was deep, powerful, a growl of steel and muscle. Clint's sharp eyes darted toward the front door, and before he could ask what was going on, Barron stood up. "Come outside with me," he said, his voice filled with anticipation. Clint, despite his skepticism, pushed himself up from the couch. His body, though aged by time, still carried the weight of a man who had lived fiercely and never backed down from anything. The two stepped outside onto the front porch, where the setting sun bathed Carmel by the Sea in warm hues of amber and gold. And there, parked in Clint's driveway, was something that made the seasoned Hollywood icon freeze in his tracks. A custom-designed, one-of-a-kind SUV, its body sleek yet rugged, painted in a deep charcoal gray reminiscent of the old Western landscapes Clint had once ruled in his films. The vehicle gleamed under the California sun, its polished chrome accents reflecting the world around it. Every inch of the SUV was meticulously crafted, blending modern luxury with an unmistakable old-school toughness, a true embodiment of Clint himself. For a long moment, Clint just stared. Barron stood beside him, watching his reaction closely. For once, the legendary man of few words was speechless. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Clint exhaled deeply, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Kid, what the hell is this?" Barron grinned. "It's yours." Clint turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Mine?" Barron nodded. "I had it built from the ground up, just for you. Every feature, every detail. I made sure it reflected you, Clint. Your legacy, your style." Clint swallowed, his throat suddenly tight. Barron gestured toward the personalized leather interior, where Clint's initials were stitched subtly into the headrests. "See that?" Barron said. "Every little thing in here has meaning. The stitching in the seats? It's based on the saddle leather of the horses from the outlaw Josie Wales. The trim on the dashboard? That's handcrafted walnut wood, same as the revolver grips from Unforgiven." Clint stepped closer, running his hand along the impeccably crafted door handle, which was subtly engraved with one of his most iconic lines. "A man's got to know his limitations." His own words, forever etched into the machine. Barron continued, his voice steady but filled with pride. "It's got the heart of a classic but the tech of the future." He motioned to the custom digital dashboard, outfitted with an AI assistant that had been programmed to respond in Clint's own voice. A private touch Barron had personally arranged. Clint let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" Barron nodded. "You taught me that details matter." For a long moment, Clint simply stood there, staring at the vehicle, his weathered hands resting against its smooth metal. It wasn't about the money or the grandeur. It was about the thoughtfulness, the depth of understanding behind this gesture. Finally, Clint turned to Barron, his voice lower now, tinged with something rare, pure, unfiltered gratitude. "You didn't have to do this." Barron met his gaze, his own voice steady but filled with emotion. "I wanted to." There was another long pause, the kind that only men like Clint Eastwood knew how to make meaningful. Then the old gunslinger smirked. "Well then," he said, "what the hell are we standing around for? Let's take her for a spin." Barron grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." With that, Clint opened the driver's side door and climbed in. The moment his hands wrapped around the customized leather steering wheel, a sense of nostalgia and excitement filled his chest. Barron slid into the passenger seat as Clint turned the key, the engine roaring to life like a beast awakening. And just like that, they were off, rolling down the winding California roads, the Pacific Ocean stretching out beside them. As they drove, the two men talked, not about politics, not about Hollywood, but about life, about meaning, about the lessons learned on the road between youth and old age. For Clint, it was a reminder that his legacy was still alive, still inspiring, still shaping the next generation. And for Barron, it was confirmation that his gratitude had found the perfect home. As they reached a scenic overlook, Clint pulled the SUV to a stop. The two men stepped out, leaning against the hood as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of crimson and violet. Clint sighed, shaking his head with a rare, genuine smile. "Kid, this might be the best damned gift I've ever gotten." Barron smiled back, looking out at the endless ocean before them. "You gave me a gift first, Clint. Your movies, your lessons. I just wanted to return the favor." Clint took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle in. He placed a firm hand on Barron's shoulder, squeezing it. "You did, kid, and I won't forget it." As the night fell over the California coast, the two men stood side by side, one a legend, the other a rising force, both forever connected by an unbreakable bond. The powerful hum of the SUV's engine echoed through the quiet California countryside as Clint Eastwood gripped the leather-wrapped steering wheel, his experienced hands steady. The vehicle moved like a dream, smooth, yet carrying the strength of something built to endure. Beside him, Barron Trump sat in the passenger seat, watching Clint with a quiet, satisfied expression. This wasn't just a car to him. It was a symbol of gratitude, a way to honor the man who had shaped his understanding of resilience and character. The road stretched ahead, winding along the scenic cliffs of Carmel by the Sea, where the ocean glistened under the golden hues of the setting sun. Clint's sharp eyes flicked from the road to the dashboard, taking in the careful details. The custom wood paneling, the subtle Western-inspired stitching in the seats, the way the controls blended modern technology with classic craftsmanship. Every inch of the vehicle felt personal, like a reflection of his own journey. For a few minutes, neither man spoke. There was no need for words. The moment itself was enough. Then Clint let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head as he turned the wheel. "I gotta say, kid, you've surprised me." Barron raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at his lips. "Didn't take you for the kind to be caught off guard." Clint nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've spent a lifetime playing men who don't flinch, but this?" He gestured toward the SUV, then toward Barron himself. "This is different. It ain't about money, it ain't about politics, it's about respect. And that's rare these days." Barron exhaled, watching the coastline blur past them. "That's exactly why I did it, Clint." His voice was softer now, more introspective. "I didn't want this to be just another flashy gesture. I wanted it to mean something, because you mean something." Clint stole a glance at him, and for the first time in a long time he saw something he hadn't expected. Genuine admiration. Not from a fan, not from an industry insider, but from someone who truly understood what he stood for. The road led them to a small, hidden overlook, a place Clint had visited countless times over the years. Without a word, he pulled the SUV over and shifted it into park. They stepped out together, the salty breeze carrying the scent of the ocean, the waves crashing rhythmically against the jagged cliffs below. It was a place of solitude, a place. Clint leaned against the hood of the SUV, arms crossed. Barron stood beside him, his gaze fixed on the endless horizon. For a while, neither of them spoke, just absorbing the vastness before them. Then Clint finally broke the silence. You know, when you get to be my age, you start wondering what it was all for. Barron turned his head slightly, listening. Clint exhaled deeply, rubbing a hand over his jaw. I've lived a hell of a life, made my mistakes, had my victories. But when the dust settles, it ain't the awards that stick with you. It's the moments like this, the people who remind you that what you did actually mattered. Barron nodded, understanding more than Clint realized. Your movies taught me how to carry myself, he admitted. How to handle pressure, how to stand my ground. I don't think I would have had the same perspective on leadership if it weren't for what I learned from your characters. Clint smirked, shaking his head. Hell, kid, I was just playing a part. Barron turned fully to him now, his gaze unwavering. No, you weren't. Clint studied him for a moment, the weight of the words settling in. You didn't just act, Clint. You showed us what being a man meant. You didn't just tell people to be tough. You showed them that real strength is knowing when to fight and when to walk away, when to speak up and when to stay silent. That stuck with me. Clint swallowed, his throat suddenly tight. He wasn't used to this kind of raw honesty, especially from someone so young. He let out a low chuckle. Well, kid, if I had half the wisdom you've got at your age, maybe I'd have avoided a few of my own screw-ups. Barron smirked. I doubt that. You wouldn't be Clint Eastwood without them. The old gunslinger chuckled, nodding slowly. Fair point. For a while they just stood there, two men from different worlds but connected by something deeper than words. Then Barron turned, walking back to the SUV. Come on, Clint. Let's keep driving. Something tells me you've still got a few stories left to share. Clint grinned, pushing himself off the hood. That I do, kid. That I do. The SUV roared back to life as they pulled back onto the road, the sky darkening into twilight. As they drove, Clint began telling stories, not the ones from interviews or red carpet events, but the ones no one ever heard. He talked about the early days when Hollywood was an unforgiving place and he had to claw his way up from television westerns to becoming a cinematic icon. He told Barron about the fights behind the scenes, the times he almost walked away, the times he doubted himself. People see the success, Clint mused, but they don't see the war it took to get there. Barron listened intently, absorbing every word like a student at the feet of a master. And then, somewhere along the winding roads, the conversation turned, not to Clint's past, but to Barron's future. You got a tough road ahead of you, kid, Clint said, glancing at him. Ain't many who'll want to see you succeed. Barron exhaled, nodding. I know. Clint's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. So what's your plan? Barron hesitated for just a moment, then spoke with a quiet certainty. To prove them wrong. A slow smile spread across Clint's face. Now that I'd like to see. They drove on, the moon rising above the Pacific, casting silver light over the endless road ahead. For Clint, it was a reminder that his time wasn't over yet, that he still had more to share, more wisdom to pass down. And for Barron, it was the confirmation that he wasn't alone, that even legends still had lessons to teach him. As they neared Clint's home, he let out a breath and gave Barron a sidelong glance. You know, kid, I never expected much from this meeting. Figured you'd be just another rich kid with too much time on his hands. Barron smirked. And now? Clint's expression turned serious, his voice carrying the weight of a lifetime of experience. Now, I think you're going to be one hell of a man. Barron didn't respond immediately. He just nodded, letting the weight of the words settle deep within him. As the SUV rolled to a stop in Clint's driveway, neither of them knew that this was only the beginning, that this night, this drive, would be the start of a friendship that would last forever. The early morning sun bathed Clint Eastwood's home in a golden glow, the crisp ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and pine through the open windows. Clint sat on his porch, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand, staring out at the waves crashing against the cliffs. Though his body carried the weight of 94 years of life, his mind was sharp, still filled with thoughts, memories, and reflections that had shaped him into the man he was. Last night's drive with Barron Trump had stirred something deep within him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was a realization that his work, his choices, his way of life, had left a lasting imprint on someone who wasn't even born when he made most of his films. The sound of tires crunching against the gravel driveway pulled Clint from his thoughts. He turned his head, expecting to see a delivery truck or perhaps one of his neighbors stopping by. Instead, his breath caught slightly when he saw the familiar black SUV, its polished exterior gleaming under the sunlight. Clint chuckled, shaking his head as he placed his coffee mug down on the railing. "Didn't expect to see you again this soon, kid." Barron stepped out of the vehicle, dressed more casually than the previous day, a crisp button-down and dark jeans. He carried a small leather-bound notebook in his hand, the same one Clint had seen briefly during their last meeting. "I wasn't planning on it either," Barron admitted with a small grin as he approached the porch. "But there's something I still need to do." Clint raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not entirely surprised. "Well, don't just stand there, come on up." Barron ascended the steps, and for a moment there was only silence between them, the sound of the ocean filling the quiet morning air. Then, Barron extended the notebook toward Clint. "I've been carrying this around for years," Barron said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "Every time I watched one of your films, I wrote down the lessons I learned, the things that stuck with me, the things that made me think." Clint hesitated for a moment before taking the book. His rough, weathered hands ran over the cover, feeling the weight of something much more significant than paper and ink. Slowly, he flipped open the first page, his sharp eyes scanning the carefully written notes in Barron's neat handwriting. "Gran Torino. Strength isn't about power, it's about standing up for something bigger than yourself. Unforgiven. The past doesn't define a man. It's what he does next that matters. $1 Million Baby. True courage isn't about winning. It's about how you handle the losses." Clint's throat tightened as he turned each page, each handwritten note a testament to the impact his life's work had unknowingly had on this young man. "Damn, kid," Clint finally muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "Didn't think anyone saw me that way." Barron leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I did." For a long moment, Clint didn't say anything. He simply stared at the pages, at the proof that his work had transcended the silver screen. Finally, he let out a quiet breath. "You didn't have to do this, you know." Barron smiled faintly. "Yeah, but I wanted to." Clint closed the notebook carefully, holding it as if it were a fragile relic. For the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest, a deep, profound sense of fulfillment. He had won Oscars, Golden Globes, Lifetime Achievement Awards, and yet none of them had ever meant as much as this. Barron shifted slightly in his chair before glancing toward the driveway. "That's not the only reason I'm here." Clint raised an eyebrow. "Oh." A slow, knowing grin spread across Barron's face. "Come with me." Clint narrowed his eyes in suspicion, but he stood, still clutching the notebook, and followed Barron down the porch steps toward the SUV. As they rounded the corner, Clint's steps faltered, his breath catching slightly in his chest. There, parked in front of him, was another SUV, brand new, but with one key difference. The license plate read, Eastwood 1. And beneath the driver's side mirror, a small but unmistakable engraving in silver lettering read, "A legacy of grit and honor, Barron Trump." Clint stared at the vehicle, his expression unreadable. Barron watched him carefully, his own heart pounding slightly. He had worked with a team of designers to create this second SUV, a replica of the original, but modified in ways that Clint would appreciate. The interior was customized to fit Clint's style, the sound system programmed with classic jazz and Western scores, and the dashboard bore a hand-carved wooden inlay of Clint's signature. But it wasn't the luxury that made the moment powerful. It was what it represented: a gift of gratitude, a symbol of respect, and, most of all, a way to say thank you in a way words never could. Clint exhaled slowly, his eyes flickering over every detail of the vehicle. The craftsmanship, the thoughtfulness, the undeniable understanding that this was not just a gift, but a tribute. Finally, he turned to Barron, his expression unreadable. "You really went all out, didn't you?" Barron smirked. "Figured you deserved it." Clint let out a deep chuckle, shaking his head. "Hell, kid, I don't even know what to say." Barron shrugged, his own smile softening. "Then don't say anything, just take it for a drive." For a brief moment, Clint didn't move. He simply stood there, staring at the vehicle, processing everything. Then, with a small nod, he pulled the driver's side door open and slid inside. His hands ran over the leather-wrapped steering wheel, feeling the craftsmanship, the effort, the meaning behind it. Barron climbed into the passenger seat. "What do you think?" Clint smirked, gripping the wheel. "I think we oughta see what this thing can do." And with that, the engine roared to life, the deep, powerful growl echoing through the hills as Clint Eastwood, legend, icon, mentor, took the road ahead with a renewed sense of purpose. As they drove, the wind rushing through the open windows, Barron realized something. This wasn't just about a gift. This was about honoring the past, celebrating the present, and setting a foundation for the future. And in that moment, as the sun began to set over the Pacific, two men, separated by generations but bound by something deeper than time, drove forward, knowing that this was just the beginning of a friendship that neither of them had expected, but both of them now cherished. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long golden rays over the winding California roads as Clint Eastwood drove with steady hands, his gaze fixed on the open stretch ahead. The powerful hum of the custom SUV filled the silence between him and Barron Trump, but it wasn't an uncomfortable quiet. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, a shared understanding between two men from different generations, bound by something deeper than words. As they navigated the scenic cliffs overlooking the Pacific, Clint finally broke the silence. "You know, Barron," he mused, his gravelly voice tinged with nostalgia, "I've been behind the wheel of a lot of cars in my lifetime. But this one might be the most meaningful." Barron turned his head slightly, watching Clint with quiet admiration. "It's not just a car, Clint," he said, a knowing smile playing at his lips. "It's a piece of you, a reminder of everything you've built, everything you've stood for." Clint nodded, gripping the wheel a little tighter. "It's funny," he said after a pause. "I spent most of my life pretending to be someone else. Gunslingers, detectives, outlaws. But at the end of the day, I just wanted to be a guy who did the right thing." Barron studied Clint's profile, the lined face that had graced movie screens for decades, the eyes that had seen both triumph and loss. "You did," he said firmly. "And you still do." Clint let out a chuckle, shaking his head. "I appreciate that, kid, but you know, as you get older, you start wondering if you really left something behind, something that lasts." Barron leaned back in his seat, looking out at the rolling hills. "You did. And not just in the movies, Clint." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "You changed lives. You taught people lessons about courage, integrity, and doing the right thing even when it's hard." Clint exhaled slowly, the weight of those words settling deep in his chest. "That means a hell of a lot, Barron." The two men drove in companionable silence for a while, the winding road stretching ahead like a path through time. Barron had chosen this route for a reason. He had done his research, and he knew exactly where he wanted Clint to go next. As the SUV rounded a bend, A small dirt road appeared, leading to an overlook. Barron pointed ahead. "Pull in there." Clint raised a brow but followed the younger man's direction. He maneuvered the vehicle onto the dirt path, the tires crunching softly over the gravel, until they reached a secluded cliffside spot overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Clint cut the engine, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Barron finally spoke, his voice softer now. "This place. This is where you filmed one of my favorite scenes from $1 Million Baby." Clint's eyes flickered with recognition. He had almost forgotten. Barron continued, "That movie changed the way I looked at life. It wasn't just about boxing or loss. It was about choices, about how the things we do for the people we love define who we really are." Clint sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "That was a tough film to make, hardest one I ever directed, if I'm being honest." Barron turned to him. "Why?" Clint leaned back against his seat, staring at the ocean as if he could see the past playing out before him. "Because it was real. Life isn't always about winning, Barron. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go." The weight of those words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Barron swallowed hard. He had grown up surrounded by power, by people who refused to let go of anything, status, control, influence. But here was Clint, a man who had lived a full life, admitting that sometimes letting go was the most important thing you could do. Barron reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn object, a pocket watch. He held it out to Clint, the metal glinting under the setting sun. "This belonged to my grandfather," Barron explained. "He gave it to my father when he was young, and my father gave it to me." Clint looked at the watch, then at Barron, confusion flickering across his face. "Why are you telling me this?" Barron exhaled slowly, running a thumb over the engraved surface. "Because I want you to have it." Clint's brow furrowed. "Now, why the hell would I take something like that from you?" Barron met his gaze evenly. "Because it's a symbol, Clint. Of time, of wisdom, of lessons passed down." For a long moment, Clint said nothing. His hands hovered over the watch, hesitant. Then, finally, he took it. His fingers traced the engravings, his chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. The weight of the watch in his palm felt like something more than metal. It felt like history, like a bridge between generations. He cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. "Damn it, Barron, you sure know how to get an old man sentimental." Barron smirked. "That's the plan." Clint let out a deep chuckle, pocketing the watch before glancing back at the SUV. "All right, kid, what's next?" Barron grinned. "I thought you'd never ask." He gestured toward the horizon, where the last remnants of sunlight were fading into twilight. "I've got one more stop planned, but first, we drive." Clint nodded, gripping the wheel once more. With a flick of his wrist, the engine rumbled to life and they pulled back onto the road. As the SUV cut through the dusky evening, Barron couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace settle over him. This wasn't about cars or movies or even legacies. This was about two men, one nearing the sunset of his life, the other just beginning his journey, finding something in each other that neither of them had expected. And as they drove off toward their next destination, Barron realized something. This moment, this connection, would last far beyond this road trip. It would live in the quiet moments, in the stories they would one day tell, and in the lessons passed down for generations to come. The SUV glided through the winding streets of Carmel, the headlights cutting through the deepening twilight. Clint Eastwood drove in comfortable silence, his hands steady on the wheel, while Barron Trump sat in the passenger seat, a subtle smile playing on his lips. He had one more surprise for Clint, one that would bring together decades of admiration, friendship, and respect into a single, unforgettable moment. As they neared the venue, Clint frowned slightly, noticing a small gathering ahead. The building was modest, tucked between coastal cliffs and quiet roads, but the warm glow of lights inside suggested something more than just an ordinary evening. Clint shot Barron a skeptical look. "All right, kid, what are you up to?" Barron chuckled. "You'll see." As they pulled into the parking lot, Clint's sharp eyes scanned the familiar faces standing outside. His breath hitched slightly. These weren't just old friends. They were people who had shaped his life. Former co-stars, directors, longtime crew members, even a few of his closest friends from outside the industry. Each of them had come for one reason: to honor him. Clint shut off the engine but made no move to exit. Instead, he turned to Barron, his voice quieter than usual. "You didn't have to do all this." Barron met his gaze. "I did, because you deserve it." Clint exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling over him. Then, with a slow nod, he pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool night air. The moment his boots hit the pavement, a ripple of applause broke out. Clint, never one for grand gestures, simply shook his head with a lopsided grin. "Damn, you all trying to make an old man cry?" Laughter broke through the crowd, but the emotion in the air was unmistakable. One by one, people stepped forward, shaking Clint's hand, hugging him, sharing stories about how he had changed their lives, not just through his films, but through the man he was. A former stuntman, tears in his eyes, clasped Clint's hand. "You took a chance on me when no one else would. I wouldn't have a career without you." An actress Clint had mentored decades ago wiped her eyes as she embraced him. "You told me to believe in myself, Clint. That advice got me through the hardest years of my life." Even those who hadn't worked with Clint directly had something to say. A young filmmaker approached him, his voice trembling. "Your movies taught me more about storytelling than any school ever could. Because of you, I found my voice." Barron stood back, watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. This was exactly what he had hoped for, a moment where Clint could see, without question, the profound impact he had made on the world. As the night continued, the group moved inside the venue. A large screen flickered to life, displaying a montage of Clint's greatest moments. Clips from his most iconic films, behind-the-scenes footage, and rare interviews where he spoke about his craft and philosophy on life. Clint watched, his normally guarded expression softening. This wasn't just a tribute to his career. It was a reflection of a life well lived. When the montage ended, Barron took the stage, clearing his throat before speaking. "Clint Eastwood isn't just a legend in Hollywood. He's a mentor, a role model, and a man of unwavering integrity. Tonight we celebrate not just his career, but the values he's instilled in all of us: courage, resilience, and the belief that doing the right thing always matters." He turned to Clint, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I can't begin to repay what you've given me through your films, your wisdom, and your kindness, but I hope tonight shows you just how much you mean to all of us." The room erupted in applause, but Clint, for the first time in a long time, looked overwhelmed. He stood, taking a moment to collect himself before speaking. "I've spent a lifetime playing tough guys," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But the truth is, the toughest thing a man can do is let himself be vulnerable enough to care about the people around him. Tonight, you all reminded me why that matters." He turned to Barron, his eyes shining. "Kid, I don't know how you pulled this off, but I'll never forget it." Barron grinned. "Just returning the favor, Clint." As the celebration carried on, Clint knew this wasn't just a gathering. It was a reminder that his legacy wasn't in the films he had made, but in the lives he had touched. As the night drew to a close, Clint Eastwood stood outside the venue, his hands resting on the hood of the gleaming SUV that Barron Trump had gifted him. The vehicle was more than just a machine. It was a symbol of respect, gratitude, and the deep bond they had formed over the past few days. The night's events had left Clint feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time, truly seen. Barron stood beside him, his hands in his pockets, gazing out at the quiet street. "I hope this week meant as much to you as it did to me," he said softly. Clint turned to him, his eyes filled with an emotion he rarely let show. "Kid, you gave me something I didn't even know I needed." He paused, then smirked. "And an SUV that makes me look even cooler, if that's possible." Barron chuckled, shaking his head. "I figured you deserved a ride that matches your legend." For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence. Then Clint's expression grew serious. "You know, Barron, you remind me of myself when I was younger. Not in the way people might expect. I wasn't born into the spotlight like you, but I know what it feels like to carry expectations, to have to prove yourself, not just to the world, but to yourself. Barron nodded, understanding the weight of Clint's words. It's not always easy. Clint placed a firm hand on Barron's shoulder. It never is. But you've got a good head on your shoulders, and more importantly, you've got heart. Don't let anyone take that from you. Barron swallowed hard, feeling the sincerity in Clint's words. I won't. With one last glance at the SUV, Clint gave a final nod of approval. You ever need anything, you know where to find me. Barron smiled. Same goes for you, Clint. As they exchanged a final handshake, firm, unspoken respect passing between them, Barron knew that this was more than just a grand gesture. This was the beginning of a lifelong friendship, built on admiration, shared wisdom, and a simple yet powerful truth. That real legacy isn't measured in fame or fortune, but in the lives we touch along the way. This story is more than just a gift. It's a testament to gratitude, respect, and the power of genuine human connection. Barron Trump's heartfelt gesture toward Clint Eastwood reminds us that true appreciation goes beyond words. It's about honoring those who shape us and giving back in meaningful ways. In a world often divided by status and generations, their bond proves that respect and kindness can bridge any gap. If this story moved you, hit the like button, subscribe for more inspiring content, and share this video, because acts of gratitude, no matter how big or small, can change lives.